Would you call yourself a socialist?
No.
You've never told a lie in politics?
No.
See, somebody sent me a video actually last Friday, and it had you talking at the Socialist Youth, whatever it's called.
Yes.
And you mentioned the word comrade about 4 times in a minute. What was that about?
It was a rally, and I would have been about 25 years old.
Comrade.
That was in 2009.
Oh, well, I can't remember which country it was in.
Has it changed since those days?
No, not particularly. No.
Hello, welcome to Liberty NZ. I'm Grant Edwards, and with me today is Auckland lawyer Liz Lambert. And Liz has some very interesting information about the COVID-19 Health Response Act and how the government's fooled them. Is that right, Liz?
Yeah, I'd say that's the main message, Grant. It's about what fools we are when we panic, let's say.
Yeah. Because the whole thing's based on fear, isn't it?
It is. Fear
and panic.
Hysteria
Yeah.
would be, pretty much what I'd describe it as.
Yeah. Oh, well, thanks, Liz. The floor is yours.
Okay.
I'll take notes.
Oh, thanks, Grant. I was looking for the piece of legislation order. It's in the form of an order. It's called the COVID-19 Public Health Response, and then in brackets, protection framework or framework protection. Maybe I've got it the wrong way around. Order, I cannot find it. However, I have found it in the past. Last week I was doing some work on it in response to somebody asking a simple question, such as the people who were in the food and drink industry, they weren't under the schedule, were they? And I said, well, yes, they were, but I'll have a look at that again a bit more deeply. So I went back to the COVID Health Response Act 2020. Was it the Response Act? I went to look at what the order of legislation had been. Now, that sounds terribly dry, but it's terribly important. To put it in a nutshell, back in March, we got, remember the WHO, this was March 2020, the WHO was saying, pandemic. I keep wanting to say pandemic. And that was responded to with a closing of our borders. And then I believe there were about 10 days, so I think that must have been about the 10th of March. There were 10 days when it was found that, in actual fact, there had been no law put into place, no legislation put into place to actually allow that lockdown. So there was about 10 or 14 days there before the next legislative move was made. And that was, people might have heard me say before, there was no state of emergency declared. There was, in actual fact. Now, the state of emergency was declared in terms of what's known as Section 70 of the Health Act 1956. Now, remember, people, the Health Act 1956, because that's going to become extremely important. The Health Act 1956 was invoked, and through that, infectious response to an infectious disease pandemic was, or epidemic was able to be put in place. So we have to look then at the Health Act 1956, all of the things that you can do. And they all include stopping people going from place to place. They actually had to do another sort of tweak to it to stop people coming into the country. It was all sort of after the fact, all shoot from the hip legislation. So from the 24th of March, I believe, 2020, we had a state of emergency. But under the, I can't remember which section of the Health Act it is, but you can only invoke these things if you've got an if you've got an infectious disease. Well, I had that in the schedule, which is in the Health Act 1956. That's where the COVID-19 is declared. And then you kept it ongoing because that state of emergency only went from the 24th of March till the 8th of June 2020. We didn't even get any vaccination talk until about April, I think it was, of 2021. So you had all that time over Christmas, and remember, it was sort of, it faded into the background. The lockdowns came off, and people moved about fairly freely. Then was all of the shakedown about the vaccination, and we started in on a round of that. Well, the only reason that we were still in supposedly emergency situation was because the state of emergency had been declared back in 2020, I think the 24th of March, went till the 8th of June, and then it was only kept going, all of these pronouncements by she who must be obeyed, by what was called a notice under the Emergency Preparedness Act, and that's 2006. Okay, so, and that allowed all of this sort of pontificating to go on at 3 months periods, and they just kept getting renewed. Well, under the 2020 Act, that then got actually passed in May of 2020, so we had these sort of interim things that kept things going, and then in the 2020 they passed the Act that allowed them to make orders. So then they could get creative, right? So then they had all of they had the testing orders, they had the border orders, they had and it wasn't until I think about April of 2021 when there was an actual vaccine supposedly suddenly discovered that was going to sort everything. But of course, we know everything had been prepared many, many years before.
Yeah.
That we got the COVID vaccination order. Now, it started off with the MIQ, the border workers, which included wharves and shipping and the airline industry, etc.
Yeah.
Okay. So those were the first three, and then I think you had corrections because you couldn't have people. Well, I'm not exactly sure why they had corrections in there, but anyway, they had corrections in there. I think that was one of the number 4, number 5, and number 6. Now we didn't get to what was called Part 10. And the groups that were included in there until it must have been around, in fact, I think it must have been the 2nd of December 2021. Right, you had all of this, before that you had the teachers and you had the medical people. They got slotted in there too, between the border workers and the others. But today I want to talk about this group 10. Now, in Group 10, I'll just tell you who we had. We had workers of food and drink business or services, workers who carry out work at gyms, workers who carry out work at a permitted event, regardless of whether the work is carried out before people arrive or leave the permitted event, workers at close proximity business and service, and I think that was things like hairdressers and massage and all of that stuff, and workers who carry out work for a tertiary education provider at tertiary education premises that are located in an area described in Part 1 of the Schedule 7 of the COVID-19 Public Health Response Protection Framework Order 2021. Now, that's the order that then we have to look at. So going back to the question about were they under the schedule, the answer is yes, for a start. But then we look at the heading of that schedule and it says Part 10, groups in relation, and what I'll do, Grant, is I'll send this over to you, and I don't know if you can add it to your podcast as notes to the podcast, but it might be useful for people to look at.
Yeah, no trouble.
Okay, so it says groups in relation to settings where CVC required for persons to enter place or receive service. Now, CVC is a COVID vaccination certificate,
Right.
or sometimes called My Vaccine Pass.
Okay.
Right, same thing. So let's now cut back to overall principles, which is what I really enjoy more than anything. And I think I've said to you before, Grant, that when I was at law school, I always remember that there was, we were taught, and I guess we were being taught as defence lawyers in this case, that everything that is not forbidden is allowed.
Yes.
Okay?
I mean, that's an old Bible.
Is it?
Yes.
I'm not
there's no transgression.
It'll be in scripture somewhere, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
If there's no law, there's no transgression.
That's it. Okay. Right. So here's a little bit of knowledge I got from just popping that search into Google. And on the Wikipedia page, it was quite useful. So it says, there is a popular maxim in common law systems: everything which is not forbidden is allowed. The idea is that in liberal democracies, we are inherently and naturally free to do anything, so long as it's not expressly prohibited by law. The opposite principle, everything which is not allowed is forbidden, states that an action can only be taken if it is specifically allowed. A senior English judge, Sir John Laws, stated the principle as, for the individual citizen, everything which is not forbidden is allowed. But for public bodies, and notably government, everything which is not allowed is forbidden. We have to go and to understand the full impact of this, we have to go and look at the Public Health Act 1956. We have to go down to the principles that are contained within that act, and I will also send you over, Grant, a copy of a part of that act that I've made, and under, I think it's section 92I of that act, under, I'm not sure exactly what's, subsection 5 anyway, and it says something like, in no circumstances is compulsory treatment allowed. Right. Now, that means,
what's that in, Liz?
so it's the Public Health Act 1956.
Yeah. Right, that's right.
Down at the principles, I've got all down. Like we get all this stuff about water and public health systems and all sorts of stuff, because it was originally, a very big act, and they've pulled a whole lot out now of especially who's control of the water, and put that into a new act. So they're trying to pull it all out of the control of local government, as we know. But then, of course, to do with epidemics, this is the act that you have to use to deal with them. They didn't want to use this act because, of course, lawyers would have gone through it and said, oh, you're supposed to be testing. You're supposed to be testing the cargo. You can't have a regime that says test people and not cargoes. You can't have a regime that says that you can let ships move about. You can't have a regime that says people can, basically what you'd usually do in an epidemic. It's not being done under the 2020 Act. It allows it to be done, and it certainly doesn't allow the 2020 Act. What it doesn't say anything about is vaccinations. And you've got to remember that the Act is the parent of the order. I'm going to be mounting a challenge, a judicial review to the order itself. But that's by the by for the moment. This is one of the things that will feature in it. So So we're allowed everything which is not allowed is forbidden, is the rule for the state, but everything which is not forbidden is allowed is the order for individuals. And you will also notice that when you read what directions can be given under the Health Act 1956, the directions are always to the individual.
Yes.
Always. There's no such thing as giving directions to groups under the Health Act.
Liz, what
Right?
was that Public Health Act 1956? What was that bit that said they can't force treatment on anyone?
It's called the Health Act 1956, not the Public Health Act.
How did it read? That bit that said
it's section 92I.
92I.
I as I for Ian.
Yeah.
And I think it's subsection 5. I haven't got it in front of me at the moment, but I will send it.
And what was the gist of that act?
The gist is that, it's talking about all of the directions that can be given, that, you've got to, if a court orders, by the way, and it's all in the hands of the director. The Director General of Health has got a general overview, but it's the what are they called? Sort of public health doctors, basically. If somebody's got a disease and it's spreadable, then they have to be kept an eye on. They can be made to stay in one place, etc. But they never can even make one person take anything.
Can't force medical treatment, which is in line with the Bill of Rights.
Yeah. So what basically we then go to, which is in line with the Bill of Rights, it's also in line with the Human Rights Act. Okay. Yeah. So if we go in the opposite principle and say everything which is not allowed is forbidden, then we can look at all of these orders to supposedly to workers. They're forbidden.
Course. So the things that companies and the government were pushing, some of them were forbidden in law.
Yes. Because of section 5, subsection 5.
Yeah. In 92I
and also
of the Health Act 56.
We get the information that we ourselves have a right. We have a right under the Bill of Rights Act under section 10.
Yes.
Right?
Isn't it incredible how they wrote those for us? Those old guys in 1956.
Right to refuse, right?
Yeah.
So then you go over to section 5 of the subsection 5 of the of section 91 as 92 and 92I, and you can see that in actual fact the state, or what's he say, public bodies and notably government, everything which is not allowed is forbidden. That is why they.
Well, that's brilliant the way they wrote that in our favour.
But the thing is, it was written in our favour many years ago. Yeah. It was always there, Many more great. There's lots of great stuff in the principles of the dealing with and giving directions in a case of a public health emergency. Let's call it that.
So if we'd been able to tell the Governor General would have been forced to stop giving it royal assent, these new laws.
The Governor General at the time, Patsy Reddy, is a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. They ride roughshod over the law, don't they, lawyers?
But the thing is that the Governor General is often not a lawyer. Just happened to be she is. Supposed to be public health. It's supposed to be public. I think she's a commercial lawyer. Most lawyers are commercial lawyers. They're mostly interested in money. That's what lawyers are mostly interested in. I've got a whole lot of lawyers that said, "Oh, I can't do that because I'm a commercial lawyer. I can't I don't know anything about employment law. I don't know anything about human rights law. I don't know anything. All I've focused on ever is the money that's in the job. They should be ashamed of themselves.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the other person who's got a huge responsibility in this and making sure that there are no laws or regulations or orders that contravene the Bill of Rights is the Attorney General.
Okay.
Now, he's a lawyer. He's always a lawyer. And that is, what's his name? Parker.
David Parker.
That's David Parker. Yep. Okay.
He's a slippery character, isn't he?
Oh, very slippery, very slippery. But let's get back to the nitty-gritty and the funny part, if you like. Well, it's not so funny, I suppose, but, you know, I mean, you got to laugh unless you don't cry.
There's some tricky characters in government, isn't there?
Yeah, that's for sure. So going back to part 10, okay. So that actual heading is very, very important because when you analyse it, and I guess you need probably good English comprehension skills.
Sorry, I missed that. What was that heading?
It's part 10, and it's in the COVID-19 public health.
Yeah.
Order.
Group 10 or part 10?
Part 10.
Part 10.
It's called part 10. I often call them group 10, but it's actually called part 10.
And that was April 21.
This would have been the 20.
December. 2nd of December.
It would have been added in on the schedule. It's scheduled to.
Yeah.
It would have been added in on the schedule on the 2nd of December.
Yeah, got you.
21.
Yeah, right. Right.
Just before Christmas, right?
Yep. Yeah, when you can't do anything, thinking about prezzies.
Campaign of get to, and you'll be able to go to all of the shows. Because remember, all of the kids wanted to go to all of those concerts and everything. And one of the groups in here is, and groups, I'm talking about groups in relations to settings where CVC required for persons to enter. Okay, so groups refers to workers. So workers in relation to settings. So the settings are in their workplaces where CVC required, right, for persons to enter, place or receive service. So there's nothing about the persons who are entering requiring to be vaccinated because that would be the general public, right? But the general public, of course, got affected because they wanted to go to the places where CVC is supposedly required. Now, I say supposedly for this reason. You go then to part 3 of it's called the Protection Framework Order. Second, 2021, part 3. The heading for this can blow your mind, so just sit down, right? CVC rules, that's one thing, and non-CVC rules.
No.
Now, what do you think a non-CVC rule would be? It would be a rule where you didn't put up CV signage.
That's COVID vaccination certificate.
Yes, COVID's where, and you would think, oh, yeah, well, you don't need it for some places, but why would you have it as a rule, right? Now, if you go to subpart 1 there, food and drink businesses or services. Now, this is, so the example. So the CVC rules that apply to food and drink businesses or service are as follows. Clause 26, regulated business or service must display CVC status. Now, I've talked to loads of people about, especially Steve, Steve Oliver from the gym, about I didn't actually look at this too much, but I knew what his situation was, and WorkSafe were around, and he's in court at the moment, still plodding on with it. And I'm going to talk to him soon, I hope. About two that came, on two occasions, WorkSafe came and, well, he wasn't there actually, and started to hassle the staff. And in one case, the gym wasn't even open, and another. Now, they all got WorkSafe got very involved about the displaying, right? The display of this CVC status, which would say CVC required to enter these premises, and then you also had to have display a QR code, I believe, that people could then point their phones at, and the CVC was on their phone as a matching barcode or something like that, and it didn't get kept, or you could actually have a place where people could show you their paper one, but I'm pretty sure most people had an electronic one, and they passed another little piece of legislation to allow people to sort of overcome the privacy aspects of this, because in actual fact, it's unlawful for your doctor to share your private stuff into the system, right? So this little bit of legislation basically allowed the privacy breaches to be overcome because you allowed it, right? We can overcome anything with a waiver, and I've talked about a waiver before. Now the stuff after Steve sent, there was an occasion that they decided we'll put a waiver out for people in. This was Chrissy Oliver's idea. And I sort of latched onto it and said to people, start doing this, people. Just put out a waiver, right? Now, when I examine this in detail, I can see that the waiver is how this all could have been avoided in the first place. But businesses thought that they had to do this stuff because they are on the schedule, right? So we've got this subpart one is they have to, regulated businesses or services must display CVC status. Regulated businesses or services must have systems and processes to check person carries CVC and to verify CVC compliance. Now, that CVC compliance is to do with it's not a forgery. So, they just put little words in, but when you examine it, you can find out what they're talking about. Clause 27 does not apply to transport station, food and drink businesses or services, and B, airline lounge, food and drink businesses or services. All right, so they weren't going to try and stop people's travelling because they all had CVC stuff anyway, but they're just, so people didn't put the two and two together.
Yeah.
Now, the non-CVC rules, now this is interesting, that apply to food and drink businesses or services are as follows. Clause 26 is exactly the same as the CVC rules, right? The non-CVC rule and the CVC rule are the same. The regulated business or service must display CVC status. The status is, do you allow people in here without? Yes, as long as you put up a sign saying we're not taking any CVC. You don't need CVC to come in here. You comply with it,
which is a waiver.
You comply. Yes, it's a waiver, right? There was a little extra. They said business or services must comply with fixed capacity limit based on specified physical distancing rule. But under the specified distancing rule, and it was all to do with standing up or sitting down, and it was like how many people you could have in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It really It tried to penalise, but I mean, that could have been in the gym, for example. You could have just said, oh, well, we're not having any of that. You can come in without a vax. And we, of course, because when you look back at, and here's the interesting part, what happens to the workers in this case is if you displayed a sign saying we're not, we don't discriminate, you can come in here without a CVC pass, then the worker, called the group in this case, would not have to be vaccinated because it applies to groups where CVC is required.
Okay. So that's your patrons and your staff.
Yeah.
Man, everybody panicked, didn't they?
Yes. Now, the other really interesting thing is, and you got to, under the non-CVC rules, customers and clients at food and drink business or service must comply with seating requirements. So distances apart, I suppose. So that was the only thing. Now, close proximity, let's have a look at them. They had regulated businesses. They didn't have anything about masks or anything like that. If you had a CVC thing, you didn't have to comply with anything about masks or seating, but they were all running around doing it, or standing up or sitting down. They were all doing it whether they had CVC rules or not, I think. The non-CVC rules that apply to close proximity businesses are as follows. So you had to display your status. You had to have systems and processes to ensure workers wear face coverings. You had to...
And could you waiver those as well, Liz? Could you waiver those, the mask ones as well?
I reckon. I reckon it's your own premises. Yeah, it's your own premises. I reckon the problem was that they all panicked and said, oh, we've got to do it.
They did.
They did.
And they didn't want to lose any more money with the lockdowns. They wanted to just get back to work, so they were doing whatever they could, jump through all the hoops the government gave them just to get back to work and make money again.
Yeah. But they didn't care about their workers, obviously. Well,
that's the key. They had them under, the government had everybody in fear. And when you're in fear, you make bad decisions.
Yeah. Gyms, what else did they have to do? Must mitigate risk of spreading COVID-19 to extent physical distancing cannot be maintained, right? So that was a close proximity business. So, they never even had anything about seating or anything like that. It was just like, do your best.
So the whole thing could have been just, we could have laughed at them and said, no, we'll just waiver that. Waiver everything.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You get your form out. You have a thing saying, I understand we're not going to go with any of this bullshit.
Yeah.
And if I catch COVID-19 here, I'm not going to sue you, which you couldn't do in any place. I mean, I had a whole big...
There's no cases of that, is there?
Yeah. CVC. It's all about displaying the status. That was the main thing. The non-CVC rules for gyms, physical distancing, fixed capacities. Okay. So then there's also, now I went to look to see, well, what is it about this CVC? So I found out that there is a little piece of legislation called, it's some sort of order to do with CVC, but it's what's called descriptive, not prescriptive. It's just how you do it, how you get online and what sort of information you've got to give people, which the the government basically, or whoever's running the show, because it'll be a company, what sort of information which would constitute a waiver to the government to actually be making that link up between your doctor's surgery where you'd gone to get the vax and the company then basically putting it onto your phone and being able to control it that way.
So are you saying that doctors could have had a waiver as well, and they could have got away with not having to do any of that stuff as well?
Yeah,
everybody.
Of course they could. They could have stood up and said, we're not putting it into a system. We don't have to. Show us the law, you know.
Well, the problem with the doctors and a lot of the nurses is they've got these guilds and councils that oversee them and rule them with an iron fist. And
the Australians are dealing to that.
We should do away with those and just have, like an association of doctors that are actually on your side, and you pay so much, like the old real estate institute. So you have an institute of doctors and you can join if you want to. But as soon as you get your 8 years qualification or whatever, how long it takes, 6 to 8 years, and you get your MD certificate, that should be it. You put your shingle out and you do your business, and you work independently of the government.
Yeah. No, but they're getting a big because the doctors get a great big bit of the health budget, that's where it goes. They originally, of course, before 1936, I think it was, there wasn't a state medical system. Yep. So I mean, and it would also weed out people who were no good at the job.
Well, surely just the fact that they are no good, you just wouldn't go back to them. And if they made a mess, you'd go to your lawyer and you'd sue them in the common law court. Yeah,
which is still available to you.
And you'd probably get a better outcome than you would going through the medical council.
Yeah, absolutely. No, the medical council doesn't look after health; it just looks after keeping doctors in line.
So I'm speaking with Auckland lawyer Liz Lambert, and she's giving us some very interesting information about the COVID pandemic and what the government did. And so we'll be back shortly with Liz Lambert.
People should not be walking around with masks. Let me just state for the record that masks are not theater. Wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and masks are protective. But it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is.
There has not been any indication that putting a mask on and wearing a mask for a considerable period of time has any deleterious effects.
There are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face.
And can you get some schmutz sort of staying inside there?
Of course.
You do not need to wear a mask indoors if, in fact, you've been vaccinated. Good that you're vaccinated, but in a situation where you have people indoors, particularly crowded, you should wear a mask.
So even if you are vaccinated, you should wear a mask. If, in fact, you are vaccinated, fully vaccinated, you are protected, and you do not need to wear a mask outdoors or indoors. When the children go out into the community, you want them to continue to wear masks.
If you look at children outside, particularly when they're with the family, walking down the street, playing a game or what have you, don't have to wear a mask.
The Academy of Pediatric actually makes that recommendation that children should be wearing masks from 2 years old onward.
And you're asking now, if your child is a member of your household, can you walk outdoors with your child without a mask? According to that chart, the answer is yes.
But the child can't, not to beat it to death.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Because now the CDC says, I think I've got this right. 1 mask is better than 0 masks. 2 masks is better than 1 mask. But you don't have to have double masks. Is that right?
It became clear that cloth coverings that you didn't have to buy in a store, that you could make yourself, were adequate.
And then you want it to fit better. So one of the ways you could do it, if you would like to, is put a cloth mask over, which actually here and here and here, where you could get leakage in, is much better contained.
And are you a double masker, Dr. Fauci? It looked like you are.